We want to welcome everybody to the AFFCNY presentation. I am Kim Reed. I work for the Adoption Coalition as a family support specialist. I'm a biological mother of a 20-year-old and an adopted mother of a 15-year-old. So I feel like I'm a little bit of an authority as it relates to parental controls for teens, especially since mine are super stealthy and always seem to figure out how to get around everything that I set up. So I spend a lot of time trying to make sure that we have good control while keeping them safe, giving them some freedom, but just keeping them safe. So joining me tonight is Carol from one of our other regions. So I'm going to go ahead and let her introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. I know a lot of you. I'm Carol Dyches. I'm also a family support specialist. I'm with the Long Island and Rockland County, and I'm an adoptive mother of two. I have a 19-year-old daughter that came to me through independent domestic adoption, and my son, who's 17 years old, came to me through the foster care system. And like him, we've had a lot of experiences with social media, some good and actually a lot not so good. I wouldn't call myself an expert yet because I'm still learning, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from some of you this evening on things that have been working for you. So I want to make sure when we get to that point, and we will address having you fill some things out in the chat, that we make this a very interactive. We'll have a lot of time for Q&A, and I'm looking forward to hearing some of the things that you've been finding that work for you. So really quickly, just as far as some housekeeping items, if you wouldn't mind keeping your screen on mute. It's just sometimes it's harder to hear the speakers, and we obviously we love your children and your families, but times we don't really want to hear them in this presentation. And we're going to ask you from time to time to type things in the chat. You can put questions in the chat. I'll be reading it off, so don't be shy.
Chat is disabled.
Oh. We're working on that for a moment.
So the chat works for me. Can somebody else please try it to see if it's a issue relative to just Grace or to everybody?
Chat is disabled.
It's chat is disabled.
All right, Katie, maybe you can help me. Give me some pointers here.
Kim, I would go into your hosting, your ability to host, and see if you can then I would go to the chat and see if you can either that, or if you want to make me a co-host for a couple of minutes, I can go in and see if I can tool around with it.
Okay, can you try now?
Of course.
Yes, I think we're good on that.
Terrific.
That worked. Thank you, Katie, for your help. All right, so we're going to give it a couple minutes here for people to start typing a little bit about their families, and we're going to move over to the next slide, which is tell us about your family. So if you could also type in the chat, what are the ages of your children and what are you hoping to learn today? And Carol will take a couple minutes just to read a few of the comments so we can see what everybody's hoping to learn today.
Okay, we'll give it a couple more minutes just to, for people to have a chance to type in.
If you want to go ahead, Carol, and start reading some of the comments now, we've got quite a few in there.
Yep. Okay. So from looking at all the comments, it looks like we have children here that are as young as 7 all the way up to 21, which is good. In regards to some questions, most of it is methods to keep our children safe online. I'd like to find out how other parents are navigating screen time. Ways to control my 14-year-old who can't get around that. and also feeling that they're not being crazy restrictive, but still keeping them safe. More methods to keep them safe online. And that's what we got in the chat.
Great, thank you. You want to change slides?
Yep.
So the next slide, we're going to talk about, just again, asking you just for some comments so we can understand the audience and what types of situations they have in their homes with their children. We'd like some comments in the chat as well. Do your children have cell phones and access to social media, or both? What issues have they experienced due to social media? If you want to switch slides here, then we can move on while everybody's typing in the chat.
Okay. The reason that we're doing this now is really primarily because our society's become much more tech dependent. And it was very interesting. I was reading an article from Psychology Today, and they say that 90% of teens between the ages of 13 and 17, 90% are actively on social media. And when they actually polled that group, they said that they're on social media or some sort of electronic device 90% of their time, which is incredible, right? The flavor of choice, so to speak, for children ages 13 to 17 is Snapchat, followed by TikTok, and then Instagram. And it's very interesting. They went down the list. The last on the list of social media sites that this particular age group is active on is Facebook and Twitter. And if you flip that, the majority of adults are on Facebook and Twitter. So, you know, we're not even navigating the same platforms anymore that our children are. So it's very interesting. And another study also from the same magazine, Psychology Today, noted that when they looked at what devices children were using to navigate social media, 75% of children ages 13 to 17 noted that they were using their cell phones to navigate social media. So 75% on cell phones, and then the other 25% would be other electronic platforms like computers or iPads, could be gaming systems where they go on social media. So it was very interesting. And I think that it's really important to note that while Gen Z has been utilizing social media in a lot of proactive ways, they're very different than we were when we first were introduced to social media. They're using it to create relationships and social consciousness platforms, which is really great. But we're also seeing some of the most disturbing statistics on how this is really creating a mental health crisis among this particular age group. Anxiety, depression, homelessness, distorted realities, social imbalances. I can go on and on and on. The addiction rate with social media is just skyrocketing, and the suicide rate for teen girls has risen 22% just from last year, which is very, very alarming. And it's all due to social media, but it's not all bad. So I hope this presentation doesn't scare you, because I think there are things that we can do to make social media safe and an enjoyable experience. But I think we also need to be mindful that a lot of our teens aren't using it in a safe way. And we just need to be aware of, you know, how to identify, put parameters in place, and make it a productive experience for everybody. And now I just want to read the chat really quickly. I see here, no major issues, but my son is addicted to cartoons on YouTube only, and sometimes I have to fight with him to go to bed, and he won't fall asleep unless there's a cartoon on. Yep, I get it. Yes, we have issues with cell phones and Xbox. Cell phone, everyone has cell phones and access to social media. My 11-year-old is more tech savvy than I am, not sure what she can do or is doing. Not currently, but had teens who do it, and it has been a challenge in terms of safety. They do not have a cell phone, but they are connected to Messenger Kids. Let's see, they both have phones, laptops, smartwatches. Yes to cell phones. I have a 9-year-old girl and 1 foster male adoptive son. What I hope to learn today is the legal aspect of privacy of foster children using social media while in foster care. Interesting, that's a good point. Ideas for helping our 15-year-old use her phone less, making sure she's not getting into stuff that's not healthy or safe. Ways to create controls for my 14-year-old who can't get around and that feel not crazy restrictive, but still safe or safer. So those are some of the concerns and issues that people here today are facing.
Thank you. Some of the mental health concerns and potential dangers of social media. And I heard a lot of the things that you guys had put in the comments are some of the things that we're going to be talking about. In preparation for this presentation, I did some research. I watched The Social Dilemma on Netflix, and I watched a couple YouTube videos. And I also polled my mom's groups on Facebook because, you know, I'm addicted to Facebook. My kids want to be on Snapchat, but I'm addicted to Facebook. So I did some polls in some of the moms groups on Facebook, and these are some of the common themes that came out of those various places. So the one thing that came up a lot is sending and receiving inappropriate photos. As early as, 8 years old, 10 years old, much earlier than I would have expected. Communicating with strangers online. I can remember when my son who's 20 now, so when he was 10, so we're talking 10 years ago, he had whatever system was available to him at the time. It might have been PlayStation back then. And I had every conversation you can imagine with this child. And I walked past his bedroom door one day after not letting him have the mic activated for a very long time. And he was talking to somebody on the game system. And the first thing was I heard his first name and his last name. He's telling somebody. And then he's telling them what school he goes to. And he starts to tell them what street he lives on. And I'm going to be honest, it probably was not one of my best parenting moments, but I walked into his bedroom. I took the headset off of his head and I tore the cord right off of it. I was so frightened that here he is, after every single conversation that you could have, he was still giving out his personal information to strangers online. Needless to say, he didn't get that option back for a couple years. The next thing that we see a lot of is inappropriate content on apps such as TikTok and YouTube. We've all heard about some of the things that the kids have been seeing on those platforms. I don't know how your For Your Only or whatever it's called feed happens on TikTok, but I can tell you, I joined TikTok for the comic value and the entertainment value. And right away, some of the things that were coming up on my feed were clearly inappropriate for teenagers. And a lot of us may say, well, it's coming up for you because you put the date of your birth in and it knows that you're a 53-year-old woman. Well, kids don't put the real birth dates in, they lie. And that's how they get these access to these social media platforms. So they're going to get the same content that I'm going to get sometimes. And I can tell you, it's not going to be appropriate for their younger developing brains. Another one that we see, distorted images of what's normal. Everybody looks perfect on Snapchat. Everybody looks perfect on Facebook because of all the Facebook and Snapchat and Instagram filters. One of the videos that is in the resources section that I actually watched yesterday, spent quite a bit of time talking about that. How, a mother, for example, was trying to teach her children, what those filters can do. So she took some of the basic Snapchat filters and showed it to her kids, and their kids are like, that doesn't even look like you, Mom. Well, of course it doesn't, because I used every filter available. So now it doesn't look like me. So that's what all your friends are doing. So, when you're worried about your friends have a better complexion than you do, or your friends have, less acne than you do, many times that's just a filter. So these kids have this need to be perfect all the time. Another thing that was in a lot of the videos that I watched was this bullying that happens on these social media platforms. And it was interesting to hear, it's more common, more prevalent with the female population, because boys generally, when they're going to bully another boy, they're going to invite them to, the back alley, and they're going to have a fist fight. But girls are going to bully them by excluding them from things, by more of an online social media type bullying. So it's really impacted the mental health of a lot of young girls, even more so than it has the boys. And another issue that we see a lot of, and that was a very common theme when I told people, was the school avoidance. You know, these kids are up at 3 o'clock in the morning. I actually think, Carol, you were telling me a story about you could see the times that your children were on things, and you saw some activity at like 3 in the morning.
Yeah.
And that alerted you to the fact that it's time to either get the devices out of the bedrooms at night or put some monitoring on there so that they can't be on their phones at 3 o'clock in the morning. Another thing that we have is this inability to form real relationships due to rarely interacting in person. And I actually see one of my coworkers on here, John, who was talking about this in one of our meetings, how it's so hard nowadays since COVID to really form good relationships with people because you're doing it all over social media. You don't get to see people's body language. You don't get to see their expressions on their faces when they're having conversations. So it's very difficult to form real relationships when you're only doing it on a social media platform. And then of course, there's just fake news. There's so much fake news on social media. There's probably a lot of fake news in general right now, more so on social media platforms.
Yeah, actually, one of the things I read today that with both adults and children, that the majority of our news comes from social media platforms, which isn't really regulated. And we always, I can't tell you how many times I've read a news article where there's spelling mistakes and just, and this is how we're now getting our news. So kids are getting information that they're now believing is true. And it's really, really damaging.
So the next slide, we're going to talk about the common issues parents of teens experience. And it's going to be very similar to the prior slide, but digging a little deeper into the addiction and the overuse of electronics. In that documentary, the Social Dilemma, there was a particular family on the documentary, and the older sister had always thought that her family had this addiction to social media. So she had been talking to her family, and her mother went out and bought one of these, like, looks like a cookie jar lock boxes for everybody to put their phones in during dinner. And it has a keypad, or you can set it so you can't open it for an hour. And her one particular, so they put it in there. They didn't turn the power off, which I think was their first mistake, because now all these devices are inside this lock box, and they're dinging, they're pinging, and they're dinging, and everyone's like, oh, can I just go check to see who that message is from? Because we're so addicted. So what is that information that's coming to us? Do I need it right this second? To go a little further with that documentary, there was one particular son in the family. He may have been, let's say, 16 or 17. And he said, I can go without my phone for a week. That will not be a problem for me. And everybody's like, yeah, right. You can't do that. And he did pretty good for about 3 days. But by about day 4, he went down to the kitchen and busted that little, phone thing, busted it right open and took his phone out, because after like 3 or 4 days, he was like jumping out of his skin. He didn't know what to do with himself. And, and it happens for me as well as an adult. I'm the same way. I know that I'm addicted to my phone, and our kids are addicted to their phones as well. Another problem that we have is the school referrals and the suspensions. So, our kids are using their phones when they're not supposed to be using their phones. When a teacher asks to give, for them to give them their phone, most kids are like, there is no way I am giving you my phone, which usually ends up in, the child storming out of the room and getting a referral. And then, many times that can result in suspensions. The suspensions and the referrals also come in sometimes because if your child is doing something to another child and it's a classmate, the school can get involved. So the school can suspend your child for sending inappropriate photos. They can suspend your child, obviously, for bullying another classmate. There's a lot of school referrals and suspensions as a result of electronics.
And I'll just add, my son, just recently and for a long story, we went through his educational file at school, and I was shocked to see what was in it, because there are a lot of screenshots from inappropriate cell phone indiscretions that he had that were actually in his educational file because they involved other students from the school. So this does affect your kids in ways that you're probably not even aware of. And yes, if you own that phone, you too could be, depending upon how serious the photo is and what's actually in the photo, you are legally liable. So whoever actually pays that phone bill, even though it's your child, you are the one that will also be drawn into court and get a subpoena or summons or whatever the repercussion is, depending upon the situation. So to answer the question about legalities, whoever owns the phone is also legally responsible for the content on the phone.
Right. So those school referrals often lead into issues with sports and work due to inappropriate posted contents, especially with sports. You know, if you get suspended from school, you can't play an X number of games as a result of that suspension. So we're having issues with the phone, which resulted in school referrals, which results in your kid's inability to participate with sports. Another thing that I've seen a lot of actually in my family, as well as some of the families that we work with, is kids who provide their passwords to their friends. And many times they do that because, you know, a lot of kids, we ground our kids from our phones. And then when our kids don't have their phones, they're going to have a panic attack if they're not able to keep up with their Snapchat streak, right? I mean, that would literally be the end of the world for some of our teenagers if they couldn't do these streaks. So many of these kids will give their passwords to their friends so they can continue their streaks. Unfortunately, what happens with that is kids will bully each other on different people. So, you know, I would be bullying, you know, Katie, let's say, for example, but I'm using my friend's phone. So it looks like somebody else is bullying you. So I can remember a couple years ago, a mother had to go to the police station because somebody was using her daughter's account and was bullying another girl. So they got called in because of the situation, when in actuality, her daughter wasn't doing anything. Her daughter had just given the password to one of her friends who was using that account to bully kids at school. So kids are giving each other's passwords all the time. Another thing that will happen, the kids will make fake accounts, right? Because a lot of us parents require our kids to let us be, you know, follow them or friend them or whatever the case is. So these kids are making these fake accounts so they can hide from their parents. And they're also making these fake accounts so that they can bully other children. It's very common that when there's bullying involved, that they're using fake accounts. And sort of in that same vein is the secret accounts. So they're either fake accounts or they're secret accounts. I think Snapchat is the one that has a lot of potential for secret accounts. So somebody can have multiple accounts. They can have secret accounts that their parents can't see. It's nice, though. We'll probably get into it in a future slide, but I liked hearing Carol's story about her niece or nephew who kind of watches her kids' accounts because her kids, you know, are making different accounts sometimes.
Yeah, you sometimes, it's embarrassing, but my son has changed his identity so many times. I know I'm a friend on one, but I know that it's an inactive account. So I do have a niece who's actually his friend on a lot of his different accounts. So she will be the one that will inform me about what's going on. And it's sad, but at least it's something in place to work for now. But kids are crafty. They have so many multiple accounts. It's always difficult to keep charge of where they are and what they're doing. So how do we keep our kids safe? How do we help them? And I think what I just said is pretty important. We have to help our children, right? We need to make sure that our kids are educated and that we're educated about what the dangers are in this world. And this is their world. They live, this is how they communicate. You know, quite often when you take a phone away from a child, it really is a lot more serious than we would think, because we're cutting off their communication pipeline, right? That's how they talk to their friends. That's, you know, their digital world is very different than our digital world. So we need to become better educated ourselves so that we can set them up for success, right? And the education, I mean, we just have a couple things here, but education is constantly ongoing and constantly changing. And not just for us, but we need to take the time to make sure our kids are aware. And we'll talk about ways to do that in the next coming slides. But our children need to understand the real dangers that social media can present, both now and also to their future. How many times have you read about, you know, a really great kid that had, you know, posted something a little crazy and lost his college scholarship or his opportunity for a great job. And, you know, these things do happen, and they are real dangers of misusing social media. Um, and I know Kim talked about that, but, you know, the importance of not accepting friend requests from strangers. I mean, these are things that we need to make sure that, you know, that's a basic one, but, you know, never providing personal information, not sharing your passwords. And I do want us to go around and share best practices in a little bit, because I think that we're all really smart people on this call and could probably help each other. But we need to take control. We can't allow other people to help us. Putting an app on sometimes isn't enough. We have to be really vigilant, and we have to make sure that we're also an active participant in keeping our kids safe. So there are a couple ways that we can do that. And we can do that with a variety of different parental controls that are available, and they kind of fall into different categories. You know, internet and Wi-Fi controls are important. You know, you can purchase different pieces of equipment that would allow you to block or unblock certain devices. They allow you to monitor the devices. And depending upon age, you can set the device up to like block certain pages. You know, they have a lot of filters and a lot of different websites to help with this. And I do want to go around, like I said, and hear from others about what you're using that's worked for you. For personal electronics, there are a million different apps that you can download to put on that. You know, I use the phone company. The phone company has an app that we put on our phones that allow us to, like the next bullet here, block and unblock the phone. It allows me to see certain text messages. And as Kim was saying before, one of the apps on my son's phone alerted me to the fact that he was texting at 3:30 and 4 o'clock in the morning, like on a regular basis, because it shows me what time he's sending out these texts. And I'm like, okay, I know why he didn't get up for school. That's, you know, it wasn't the stomach ache that he said. It was the fact that he was probably dead tired because he was up almost all night on his phone. The wonderful thing about a lot of these apps are they do keep your kids safe. You know, if you have a child that's compliant. I know a lot of people heard about Life 360. It's a great app. It allows you to find out where your child is. It even shows you if they're driving. There's a driving component, how fast they're driving, where they're driving. And many times I will look at the Life 360 to say, like, did they go to class today? You know, because my daughter's away in college. I don't really know what she's doing anymore, but I can look at, she keeps her Life 360 on so I can see, you know, if she went out to class, she's an athlete, did she go practice today, which is a little further away from the campus. So there are a lot of great ways to set up things on personal electronics. And then of course, if your child's using a device that's coming from the school district, contact the school district. The school district can put filters and different controls on their electronic devices that will block certain pages. And particularly if your child's using a school issued device, you want to make sure that you're monitoring that device, because the school also eventually will get alerts and will monitor that device. If there's anything inappropriate on it, you again will be held responsible from a legal standpoint, and it's not pretty.
I think that's a good point. And just if we can just sit for a minute on the school devices. We all know when, you know, COVID started, all of a sudden kids who hadn't traditionally had devices were sent home with Chromebooks and iPads and things of that nature. And a friend of mine, her daughter, who was maybe, let's say 15, was teaching her, you know, 12 or 13-year-old how to sidestep the controls on the school's devices. And they had Snapchat now downloaded onto a school device. Say, you know, this 12 or 13-year-old was sending inappropriate photos to people. And, you know, because that was a friend of mine, she reached out to me and she told me about it. So I reached out to the school and I said, okay, you've given my daughter this device. My daughter was probably 13 also at the time. And what are you guys doing about controls? And they're kind of like, good question. And I was like, good question. You just put devices in the hands of how many thousands or hundreds of thousand kids across the country, and nobody's put any thought into how we're going to keep them safe while using electronics. So if you suspect that your kids are doing things on their devices, their school devices, call the school, call your school's IT department and say, what are you guys doing? What kind of controls do you have in place for that? So the next slide, we're going to talk about So will your kids be able to sidestep the controls that you set up? They absolutely will. They are super stealthy and super smart. So, I consider it my job to try to stay a step ahead of them. So I don't just hand my daughter a phone with a parental control. When I get that phone back at night, because I do at 9 o'clock at night, I get that phone back from her. I go on that phone and I try to download Snapchat or I try to download Instagram, and I make sure that the system that I have set up on it is stopping that from happening. I will, test out some of the keyword alerts that I have. So, I'll type weed in there to see if I get an alert for weed. And so I'm constantly testing those controls, because I know that my son was always able to get around everything that I set up. So they're going to figure out your parent control passwords because they're super smart, and they're going to watch you because they're going to say, "Ooh, I only need 5 more minutes on my device. Can you put in my password?" Because their phone's going to say you're out of time, and you're going to take the phone and you're going to somehow they figure it out, right? I see John shaking his head. So my son taped a recorder on the ceiling so that when I was putting the password into his phone, he recorded on the ceiling what my password was. So they're going to figure out your passwords. So change them often and change them to things that your kids don't know about. One of the passwords that I used for a long time, I think only the people on this call will know what the numbers are that I use. The kids generally won't. But think back to that song when we were growing up, Jenny, Jenny. And there was numbers that came after Jenny, Jenny, right? I see some of you guys smiling, and I see that you guys know what I'm talking about. Well, kids won't probably know what those numbers were, right? Because they don't know that song. So think of something that your kid is not going to know about. Something, don't use your birthday, don't use your wedding anniversary, don't use your kids' birthdays. I used to use, for years, I used my cat and the year that we got my cat. So my password forever was Miley 2008. My kids figured that out. I had no idea they had figured it out, but it was too easy. So make sure your password's difficult. And they're things that your kids won't guess. They will find ways to get around the parental controls like we talked about. I don't know how they do it. I haven't figured it out yet, but there's, things that they can download that look like certain things that will get around your controls. So like I said, spot check them on occasion. The next one is one that will be very, very difficult for you to control. They're going to set up social media on their friends' devices. So if you have provided your child with a device that won't allow them to download Snapchat or won't allow them to download Instagram, they're going to do it anyway. They're going to do it on their friends' phones. And sometimes you'll hear about it from other parents, right? Because I'm pretty open with my friends and with my children's friends' parents, what my child can and can't have. So sometimes other friends will rat them out to their, like, I'll get a message from somebody and say, "Ooh, my daughter just showed me this message that your daughter posted on Snapchat or your son posted on Snapchat," and I'll get screenshots of those. So, if you have that good sort of, it takes a village, right, to raise children, you may get some of that intel, you may not. It's a really hard one to control. Another thing that they're going to do is you're going to give them a device that's going to be pretty locked down the way that you want it. It's set to turn off at 9 o'clock. It's set to have X amount of screen time hours. It's going to be set up with keywords, and they're going to just get devices from their friends. Their dad got a new phone, their friend's dad got a new phone. It's sitting in a drawer. They take it, they sell it to your kid for $10. Now your kid has a device that has no controls on it. So how do we sidestep that? How do we control that, I should say? So you can't control it when they're out. You can't control it when they're at McDonald's and they're using the free Wi-Fi from McDonald's, or when they're standing outside the public library using their free Wi-Fi. But you can control it when it's in your home by having that router that we talked about in the prior slide, a separate router that will give you, I'll get alert on my phone if a device tries to connect to our router that isn't an approved device. I'll get an alert. So then I know there's a new phone and I can block it. So I can block that phone. So now that phone's out of the mix. But it is unfortunately something you're really going to have to keep up with and you're going to be super diligent with. So that kind of goes back to the things that we talked about in the prior slide. There's a lot that you can do to control, but you just need to keep educating and continue to educate and continue to share the stories with them that you hear about. They're going to set up their secret accounts. We talked about that already. They will download videos So when their Wi-Fi limits are in place, they can still watch. So, if you think I'm going to just turn their, Wi-Fi off so they can't use their phones at night so they'll get some sleep. But a lot of the kids can download that movie that they're watching to their device. So it doesn't need Wi-Fi and it doesn't need data for them to watch it. So for me, that's the reason that I have my kids' devices in a lockbox in my bedroom at nighttime so that we don't have any of those issues. And they're going to turn off the location so the tracking doesn't work. So if you have a 360 or you have some tracking through your Bark app or your Guardian app, they will turn it off. Some control apps will allow you to lock out their settings so they can't turn it off. But then, they can't, change the color of their background, and they're going to be always, why you lock down my settings? Why you lock down my settings? So with the tracking, same thing. I just spot check it. So if I spot check tracking and it's off, I go pick up my daughter and I say, I'm sorry, your playtime is over, whatever it is, whatever they're doing, and say time to come home now because your tracking's off, and that's against the rules. So we do have some ways, but I think that the big takeaway from this slide is we are going to be super diligent and we're going to work very hard, but they're going to figure out how to get around a lot of the stuff we put on. So it's just staying on top of it.
Which is definitely part of monitoring everything that they do. Again, I like this requiring them to be your friend, which is great, as long as you're looking at the right account. So, and I told the story before, but if you can, and if you have other siblings that are willing to be that person for you, that's one way around the fact that they'll have multiple accounts. Speak to someone that is their friend, and just let them know, hey, I need you to keep an eye on, just let me know if anything crazy is going on. I don't need to know everything, because we don't. I mean, there comes a point in time, particularly with our children that are older, we're going to hope, and it's our goal as parents to teach them autonomy and teach them responsibility and teach them to be conscious social human beings that are hopefully doing the right thing. But social media, like we said, is a very addictive animal, and we'll talk about in some other slides coming up, but there are things that social media does to make our kids stay on the devices longer, to make them or push them to sites they shouldn't be at. And I know there's just in the news, they released from Facebook how manipulative the background or algorithms are that actually push content to these kids without these kids even asking for it. And then they're on the device longer because it becomes this hypnotic rhythm that they have on the media. So that could be really, really challenging for them. We talked about spot checking their devices, and I can't talk about this enough, because again, you are held legally responsible as a parent who's for that phone for any content that's on that phone, whether it's a risque photo, it could be a number of things that will put you in some hot water legally. So you want to make sure that you are checking those phones. Social media contracts are great, particularly for the younger kids that are on this call. In the beginning, when my children first got a device, I gave them all social media contracts for the phone, for their iPads, for the Xbox. They broke all their contracts already. But it was a really good tool in the beginning of our relationship. And I think if I were probably a parent that would have followed through a little bit more, I might have got a little bit more longevity out of those contracts. But they do work, particularly if they're tied to consequence. So I don't want to say social media contract is not worth anything, because for a lot of our kids that do follow rules, it's a really good way to start to get them to be compliant, understand the rules, and also pay for the damage, because a lot of times our kids will damage their devices. So we need to have something in place that lets them know it's great, but when you damage it, you're paying for it. Last but the consequences and boundaries around social media, again, it's for us to put in place, and all of us are parenting different children. So what works for me may not work for the person next to me or the person next to you. So, it needs to be something that will work in your home for the child that you're parenting, for the stage that they're at. And that will change as they develop with time, and as they get older. So for those of you that have the 7-year-old, your consequences and boundaries are going to be very different than even the 11 and the 14-year-old, right? Ages and stages. So just keep that in mind when you're putting these things together. And there are a lot of organizations and resources that can help. We keep referring to a movie, Screenagers, and if you haven't seen it, it's on Netflix. If you have, and I believe it's on Amazon Prime. I think you can get it on Amazon Prime too. It's a really good documentary that kind of talks about the addictive nature of social media, what's going on and how damaging it is, but also how productive it can be when used in the right circumstances. But it opened my eyes to how manipulative things were and made me understand more that sometimes our kids really can't control their media use because they're being driven by these social media companies to keep them online. That's their goal. Keep them online more, shove more advertising at them, clickbait sites. I mean, all of these things that are part of that social media experience. Like is another really good film. You can get it on Hulu right now. Like talks about like the like button on Facebook, and the guy that created the like button on Facebook is in the documentary to talk about, again, how dysmorphia is such a big part of social media, how as Kim was talking about, all those filters and, the fact that, the news that these kids are looking at and the images that they're looking at aren't even real images anymore, because they had interviewed a girl on the Like movie that didn't get enough likes when she posted a picture from her family vacation. So she took it down because she felt horrible that like no one liked her photo. And she went back in and she re-edited the whole thing, and it wasn't even anything close to what the reality was. Put that up and she got more likes, and again, just misleading our kids, feeling that they have to fit in by how many people like a photo or follow them on a particular social media site. Some of the organizations up here are very unique and really worth your time checking out. The Look Up organization is an organization, it's a 501c3 group that it started by youth for youth. And it has so much information, even for us as adults, on it, because it's dedicating to helping children thrive in the digital social world. So they look at safe practice initiatives. They'll have a lot of information on monitoring, keeping kids safe. They do webinars as well. They have different documentaries, great articles, and a lot of suggestions to help you with monitoring your child's social media experience, but also I'm helping your child understand how they can keep safe. The same thing for the Center for Humane Technology. That was started by a bunch of ex-Google guys that realized, you know what, we're creating chaos here. And they wanted to take back the social media experience by allowing it to be an engaging experience that isn't as damaging. And it's the same thing for Common Sense Media. Common Sense Media is another one of those really great sites that helps teach parents and children to be more responsible online and to use it for the social good that it was originally intended for. It became a really big business somewhere down the line. And I think a lot of the big companies like Facebook and maybe Instagram forgot about, their original mission to help connect people and make people feel good. And the Common Sense Media has, again, a lot of resources for you to pick through, as does the Digital Wellness collection cooperative. It's about creating healthy relationships with social media. You'll get a lot of good tips. And Turning on Life is kind of what it says. It's an organization that helps you manage the screen time, even giving you suggestions for how to do that in your home for your teens, and balancing your life online. And Text Less, Live More is also very similar to the Turning on Life, in that it wants you to understand that there is a balance between your time online and your time in life outside, off of social media. And they give you ways to do that. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I don't even turn my phone off, and I'm an adult. I mean, I keep my phone on all the time. I'll put it next to my bed, but it's not off because I may get a text, I may get a message. So imagine our kids who don't have, their brains aren't developed yet. And some of them may have other challenges on top of just navigating social media, trauma and other things that make their life even more complicated. So take a look at some of these sites because they really have a lot of information to share to us as parents, but also when you think your child's ready to absorb that information, it's a great site for your children to look at as well. And this is a helpful resource page. We're going to ask you to take a moment. I think we probably might already have this information, but if you haven't already put your name and your email address, would you put it in the chat? Because this way we can email you this particular slide, which has a lot of information, like a lot of data on this situation. If you're data people that want to like know the stats and know and understand that, there's a lot of good data here. We have a whole section on the bottom here on strategies. My favorite is how to break up with your phone, but like there's all different strategies on, like I just said, how do you, and I see the questions in the chat, how do you get them to do that? A lot of these resources will be very helpful for you to do that. There's obviously information on the organizations I just mentioned, like Look Up Live, Text Less, a couple of good articles, and then obviously some videos that if you want to continue your education in this area to look at. And I highly, 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 highly recommend The Social Dilemma. It really opened up my eyes to how manipulative these companies are and what they're doing, even to us as adults, and we're victims as well, because again, I can't tell you how many times I've gone on social media and I went to go on to check one thing and an hour later I'm still on it and I don't know how that happened. And now I do, because there are algorithms and things in place that keep pushing content to keep our eyeballs and our bodies in that seat on that site longer. So with that being said, I'd love to open it up to some questions, and I really want to have this time be very interactive so that we can address some of your concerns. And I'm just going to look in the chat to see if there was anything that was brought up that we may want to jump on now. Okay, this is a very interesting. Our challenge was that we were discouraged from using monitoring or limiting phone use by our caseworker due to social importance. But she was, I'm sorry, but she was not, also not safe at all. So not sure where to go from here.
I'm happy to speak to that. Not all not all parental controls apps. You don't have to look at every single conversation the child's having. You can have alerts set up. I would have to disagree with any caseworker that says that it's not important for us to know if our children are on, Snapchat trying to buy a nickel bag of weed, or, sending inappropriate topless photo to somebody. Those are things that I think any social worker would agree is important for us to know. So, there's levels within those parental control apps. The parental control app that I have is set up with keywords, and I can put any keyword I want in, because we know kids will use like different words. Like the new word is Nick, N-I-C, and that is some type of a drug. I'm not sure exactly if it's a vape or what it is, but that's not something that maybe would have traditionally have been set up in your app's keywords. So it'll come with certain keywords, and then you can add keywords. So that way you have that alert. You have that alert that there was an inappropriate picture sent. And that way you can, thank you, Alana. I knew it was something like that. Nicotine stick, it's a vape. Nick is what they refer to it as. So you have the keywords. So, I have this conversation with my child. I have the ability to look at every single text message that is sent from and received in her phone. I choose not to, because I want to respect her privacy. But if I get an alert, it'll tell me that this word or this key phrase was said by, Joni or whoever the person is. And then my daughter knows I'm going to go to that communication with Joni and I'm going to see what was said. So, I tell my daughter and I tell other children that we work with is that if there's nothing of concern for me, I don't want to read your text messages. I don't want to read the idle chit chat that you kids have with each other, the YouTube videos, like I have better things to occupy my time with. But if I get an alert, I'm going to look. So just make sure I don't get alerts. Tell your friends that, mom is looking at my phone alerts. So, I would, if it were me and it was a social worker that was telling me that I shouldn't be monitoring my child's phone, I think I probably would ask them, if they're going to give me an indemnity agreement that says that I'm not going to be responsible for anything that they do. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and we can take your questions or comments.
Well,
We have a question from Nicola. I just lost it, but is it okay to let your kids be on social media? I think I saw that question. Did I just lose it? It just popped up. So are you saying that it's okay for foster kids to be on social media? I was told by my agency that my son cannot be posted or included in photos and videos. So I don't think I can answer that question. So I think just to restate, I think you're asking me if you can post photos of your foster children on social media. And I think the answer is no. And that's going back, 10 or 12 years ago when my daughter was a foster child. I see some people I'm in a lot of moms group, and I think maybe some states are different, but I'm 99.9% certain in New York, you're not allowed to post pictures of your foster children.
right.
I do think that a
As
lot of
foster
people.
mom, yeah, as a foster mom, I can tell you, at former foster mom, but my certification's lapsed. But yeah,
I think a lot of people try to get around it by putting like big, yellow smiley face emojis over them, or maybe just like take a picture of the back of them as they're like overlooking a beautiful lake or a sunset. But I'm not exactly sure what the ins and outs of all of that is.
No, you cannot put foster kids on any of your social media site at all. That's the state rule.
Yep.
You have to have parents' permission. You cannot do it. You cannot take the picture whatsoever.
Thank you, Rama. Another question I see is, maybe you mentioned it, but what is the app that gives you the alerts? So we have to be very careful not to appear like we are recommending any apps, because that would be a problem for the agency. So I'm just going to tell you that off the top of my head, there's probably 3 or 4 that I can think of just based off the top of my head that either I use or my friends use. So you can look at, Verizon is going to have your family plan, I think it's called. There's a lot of things that you can do right within your iPhone, your child's iPhone. Under screen time, there's a lot of things that you can do, a lot of ways you can control your kid's iPhone from your iPhone. You can get Bark, you can get Guardian. I think Disney might have an app. So please, if anybody else has a different app that they're using, please go ahead and throw it in the chat comments, because a lot of them have very similar capabilities. My suggestion would be to, Google the app and see, everyone you pull it up, it'll kind of give you like a checklist. It does this, it doesn't do this, it does this, it doesn't do this. Or if you're active on Facebook and you're in Facebook moms groups, I sometimes find that those are a very good place to get, and dad's groups too. I don't want to exclude John, parents groups, where you can go in there and ask a question. Hey, I'm having trouble with my child, keeps, sending inappropriate photos. How do I stop that? And you're going to get way more information than you probably wanted, but you're going to be able to pick out some good information from what other moms are using and experiencing.
I see.
Any other questions?
I was going to say, I see in the chat there was a couple of suggestions about searching for different apps. And I just wanted to remind, depending upon, again, the age and stage, because when you have children that are a little bit older and you're putting an app on their phone, depending upon their capability, is that you have to be really, really careful. I learned that the hard way with my son, because I didn't ask his permission and I put a lot of apps on his phone, and some of them are very visible, like the kids know they're on there. And it just made the situation even harder, because then I lost the trust that I had with him, and I had to rebuild that and that took a long, long time. Because he didn't really understand the need for it or care to understand the need for it, even though, you know, as a parent paying for the phone, I definitely have the right to put it on. But be very careful and have the conversation with your children before you put all these apps on their electronics so that they know they're on there. And if you feel that you can't, then make sure if you're putting an app on, there's only one phone company I know that has an app that's sort of like invisible. You need to be careful about that because it's a big trust issue with our kids, and our kids come to us with trust issues. So we want to make sure that we're being transparent in why, as far as the care and their security.
Yeah, I second that. Anything that I've ever put on my kids' phones, they're aware is there, and they know what the capabilities are. They know what I'm allowed to see on the app, what I can't see on the app. You know, what I can do on the app. Like, we didn't talk about it too much here, but one of the things that we didn't put in the presentation, but can be an issue for parents is, you know, your child does something inappropriate, or you need to take their phone away for whatever reason. It's 9 o'clock, or it's time for dinner. Give me your phone so that we can sit down to dinner. And kids will fight you tooth and nail, right? I'm not giving you my phone. No way. They're gonna pitch a fit. The app that I use, I can just go to my phone. I can pull up the parent control app and I can lock their phone from mine. Done. Lockdown. No more fights, no more questions, no more arguments. So that's a good feature. I also can set it so that, you know, if they're having difficulty focusing in class and their phone has become a problem, I can set it so that it's only on during lunch break or on during study halls. There's a lot of different capabilities that you'll have with most of those apps. And those apps are going to run you anywhere between $5 a month and $15 a month. I think it's money well spent.
Yeah. There's a question here. How can caregivers explain to children that these safety measures are necessary, since kids have a tendency to be sneaky with these things when they are not allowed? How can it be approached with compassion for the kids' desire to explore these things?
Well, I think the first thing is what you said, is that when you give them the device, this is the device. I know you wanted it. I'm, you know, very understanding that everybody has it, your friends have it, but this is your contract. This is the requirements for you to have it. So you're right out the gate, you're explaining to that child that, you know, this is what it's going to be. So you're going to have that direct conversation, but you can have some of those other conversations, some of the nurturing conversations. You know, depending on your kid's age, what they'll agree and believe or not believe is always a little bit challenging. You know, you can share stories with them. I'm constantly sharing stories with my children that I see online or that other parents have had issues with. I mean, mine, I didn't let her have Snapchat for a long time. And not too long ago, she said, you know what, you were right. I wouldn't have been ready when I was 12 or 13. You're right. You were right. So it's just like anything else. They're not going to understand probably because they think that they understand everything and it never would happen to them. But I did see somebody in here that said that their child was part of a very terrifying experience, interstate child soliciting. So if you feel comfortable unmuting and talking about that and sharing, that would probably be helpful to the group. If you don't, that's fine too. But we do have a comment that says, we had a foster child who became part of an interstate child soliciting case. It was horrifying. She was only 14.
Hi, yeah, that was me. We had a teenager placed with us under an emergency placement, and she stayed with us for 10 months, but she came with a cell phone. She was 14. She looked like she was 35. She was very developed, and we didn't, you know, she was like, I didn't have any other teenagers, so I didn't understand what Snapchat even was. I just figured it was like something like Facebook, you know, or Instagram or whatever. But yeah, it came out that she was, you know, doing her homework with the door closed, but she was actually taking pictures of herself and posting them. And next thing you know, she was being solicited by someone who was on a reservation in South Dakota. And yeah, that ended up It freaked her out. She got scared and she told her mother on a visit what happened. And the mom made the right choice and, went to the police and it ended up, she wasn't the only one, obviously, that he was acting like this with, but he wanted her to show him everything and had her believing that he'd come and get her.
Scary.
Yeah.
I've heard similar stories of, the grooming that happens beforehand and how they gather that information very innocently, just over, oh, what'd you do tonight?
Yeah.
Oh, I went to a football game. Oh, really? Who's your mascot? Things that the kids don't even think would be a problem. And 2 weeks later, oh yeah, wow, we have this canal going through our town. Do you have a canal in your town? Like it takes time and they get the information, they figure these things out. But I think I heard a story of a parent who got a package in the mail that this person was sending their child a cell phone that their parents wouldn't have the ability to control so that they could have, more private conversations. And the kids just think it won't happen to them.
And I think there was a question in the chat about what happens when your child comes to you with a phone. Again, how is that controlled and how do you put things in place? And I just want to remember to tell you guys to go to look up to Common Sense Media and Digital Wellness Collaborative, because there's a lot of info on those sites to address a lot of the things you're saying. They give a lot of suggestions for not only monitoring, but like how to talk to your kids. That was another question, like how do I even start that conversation with my child to make them understand that they need to be safe and well. And and trust me, they're getting a lot of this in school too. So it's not, they're getting this from a lot of different angles. But there are some suggestions on those websites and some articles that you can pull down, even scripts. There was one of them that actually had a script on how to have a conversation with your child about it.
Can I just say that I was a first grade teacher a few years ago in a small Catholic school, and part of the New York State curriculum that was being implemented, even in the small schools that weren't public schools, had to do with teaching kids how to be safe online. So the kids are learning this even like in first grade, kindergarten. There's curriculum for every grade level, and it's mandated to be introduced to them at their level at increasing levels of safety and what they need to know about each year. So I don't know if the kids are coming home and telling anyone that, but I know that I was teaching that in first grade to my kiddos, and all of the other teachers were teaching at their levels. So if that makes you feel any better.
It does.
It
It
does,
does.
and it does,
It does.
and like I said, having it come at all different sides, it can't come enough really, because our kids need to hear it again and again and again.
Yeah.
So we've got some time left. So I'd love to hear, what issues you guys are having with your children's phones, and what advice we could give you or information we could share with you. And then also any more questions that you guys have.
I just wanted to talk about the trafficking really quickly too. The trafficking issue, particularly on Long Island, it's skyrocketing right now. I just went to a workshop on it. It's really very frightening, and a lot of them are reaching our kids by friending them on social media. So again, it goes back to really monitoring who your kids are talking to and who they're being friended by, and reinforcing the difference between a social media friend and an actual person that they know. Because that's what happens is as you said, Kim, that grooming process is it takes time, and it's usually done through social media sites.
To that point, when my daughter first, I don't do it as much anymore, but when my daughter first got her phone, the only thing she could do on it is I had it set up to only do phone calls and text messaging as sort of the first step. And I could see any contacts that she would put into her phone. And the rule that I had set up is that the only people that you can put in your phone are people that you could physically invite over for dinner. I don't want you to be putting in there, Joey's cousin's sister's uncle's friend who lives in North Dakota. So I would always have those conversations. Oh, I see you added a new contact. Who is John Smith? Oh, he's, you know him. They live around, such and such street. Oh, okay, cool. But if it was somebody that I didn't recognize, we would be having a conversation about that, because I think depending upon the age, when they're younger, I think we need to help them understand and make those decisions, because if you can't talk to that person in real life and they can't come into our house and into our backyard, or we won't see them at the football game, then that's not the people that we're going to be communicating with at a very young age in our electronics. I do see a question here from Grace, and I'm going to ask maybe for Rama to give me some input, because I know that she's a foster mother and she worked for the coalition, but let me see. I think someone mentioned this before, but what about kids who come with their own phones? That was our situation. I think that is why the caseworker felt the way she did. I would be interested to hear how you navigate property that a foster child brings themselves. So Rama, have you had any experience with that?
Oh, no, because all the kids that I had are little, so none of them had their own phone. But I had a 15-year-old who wanted a phone. So her mom asked me if I can buy her a phone. So I did. And DSSA was okay for me to get her a phone while she's in with me. So in that case, I did get her a phone, because I wasn't always home and my kids had a phone. So just in case of emergency, she can reach me. And she was at school and there was an emergency, or she was at work and I can go and grab her, or she was somewhere else she can reach me at. That was the only reason I agreed to get her a phone. And her mom was okay with it. But other than that, I would not get her a phone, So, but all the other kids that I had, they were little, but they will use the tablet for like a kid's purpose, just to watch like a YouTube video or be on Netflix for like a little kids, cartoons and stuff like that. But I don't buy a phone for any kids that come into my household. I don't allow it at all.
Right.
Yeah.
That's helpful. So I guess we haven't really answered your question, Grace, and I apologize for that. I know if I were in that situation, I haven't fostered in a long time, so I don't have a lot of good information, but I think I would probably have that conversation before the child came, and I'd make sure that the caseworkers who place these children understand what the rules are going to be in my home, and make sure that that's something that they can support before you accept a placement. I see Kitty's hand raised. Maybe she has some good advice. She's a seasoned foster mother as well.
Yeah, and sorry, I'm not going to be on screen. I'm relaxing, but I do want to tell you that I do have history with receiving a 14-year-old foster son, and he came with his own phone, and it was actually something that he had with him, not just from his biological home, but from another foster home. So he was already used to having this piece of equipment for himself. So what I ended up doing is inviting the caseworker over. The second week he was with us, I invited her over and we sat down at the dining room table and we discussed what it was like in our home with cell phones, and that nobody brought their cell phone to bed. So we ended up having a really productive conversation, because the caseworker was able to sit there, and shake her head and say, oh yeah, that's right. And she backed me on a lot of things that were our protocol within our family. So we did actually do a contract for this young man, and he was to put his cell phone on my dresser each night before I went to bed. But he ended up getting another cell phone from a friend at school, and he would, be such a good boy, putting, that one that I knew on the dresser, but yet he was up all night with another cell phone that somebody had passed off to him. So that did, mean that I called the caseworker back in and said, this is becoming an issue and I'm finding it hard to handle. So what do you think? So when I put it back to her, she had said to him that, you're not being honest. It's very important that we all understand this contract and it means one phone. And so that's how we handled it. But you have to be pretty creative, because there can be easily triangulation. If I didn't bring the caseworker in to talk with this boy, there could have been so many different variables to the script.
Thank you, Kitty. We have a question from Vicky. I don't feel my 12-year-old is ready to handle a phone yet, although many of her friends have had them for a long time already. She pleads for one every day so she will fit in. What is a good age for a girl to have a phone? I know my child and it seems like 14 might be better for her. That's a really hard question to answer, and it's a very good question, a question I think we all ask ourselves. I would suggest looking into some of the phones that have limited capabilities. There's something called a GAB phone. I think that there's a couple watches that give them the ability to communicate with just a couple people. Or, get them a smartphone, but get an app that will lock down the things that you don't want them to have access to. So like I said, when I initially gave my daughter her cell phone, I didn't give her a fully functioning smartphone. I locked down the things I didn't want her to have access to. I locked down YouTube. So literally when she first got the phone, for probably the first, I'd say half a year, maybe even a full year, the only thing that she could access on the phone was the monitored text messaging, the phone. I think I might have let her have Duo early on, but I think there was a period of time where I might have taken Duo away from her. And I let her have Pandora and Spotify just for music. And then as she started, we started seeing, she understood the rules and we weren't having a lot of problems, then I would add something else. And then we would wait a little longer and add something else. Added some of the games that were, that I looked into that weren't so bad. I allowed some of those apps. So it's really hard for our children to be the only one not to have something. And it really does, it impacts them in a lot of ways. So, if you were my sister and you asked me this question, I would tell you to give her something that is pretty locked down so that she doesn't have to feel left out. So I think that's going to be as damaging probably to her mental health and, a lot of other things that could happen. If you have a home phone, maybe that's an option. We didn't. We got rid of our home phone years ago when cell phones became really popular. So she couldn't even use the home phone to talk to her friends. So, that would be my thoughts on that particular question. Certainly would love to hear anybody else's thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I agree with the locking certain sites. We did it with my son for actually different reasons. When he was 12 years old, he had just come out of the hospital and he had a lot of mental health challenges, and social media is probably one of the particularly with the social media stuff, just exasperated all of his triggers. So we allowed him to still keep his phone because that was his lifeline, his communication. That's how they all communicated. But we shut down all of the social media capabilities on the phone. And yes, kids are smart. He was able to go through his Xbox, but at least for the majority of the day when he was out of the house, he did not have access to that. And I think it was really important. And you can do the same thing. So I totally agree with that. And again, on the particular resource lookup that you'll get in the presentation of the PowerPoint has a whole section on when to start a kid, even information on kids who want to start their own, a lot of kids start their own channels and their own, TikTok pages, their own businesses online, their own groups online. It talks about the pros and cons of all of that as well. And there is a section on there, particularly for when a kid gets a new device, when's the right age, what's the right stage, and how to identify that. So you can even take that quiz and see if she's ready. And I know there was a question about financial issues and social media in regards to paying and stuff like that. I don't know if anybody has experience there. I personally don't, but I just wanted to throw it out to the group.
What was the question that you're referring to?
It was in regards to using social media, misusing, purchase apps like Venmo, and when you're buying things through social media, on ways to control your kids not to utilize those kind of things.
So I don't know what's out there now, but I can speak from experience. When my son was younger, it was always a big deal to buy extra ammunition, I guess, off of like their Xboxes and their PlayStations. So I had given my child, I put my credit card in there, and he swore he wasn't going to charge anything without my permission. And about $800 later, he charged a lot. And it took a long time to get my credit card out of there because, Xbox wants it in there because they don't want, many parents won't call. Many parents will just be like, oh, my kids, made a bad choice and now I have an $800 credit card bill. But I wasn't going to have that. So I called Xbox and they removed most of the charges for me, which was nice. I had to sit on hold for hours and hours and hours. So when we finally got a different device and I had an opportunity to reset it up, I would not put my credit card in there. I would buy Xbox cards or PlayStation cards that would have an X amount of money in there. And then if my son, would come to me at, 10 o'clock and, oh, mommy, I need this $5 thingamajig. Can you just put it in? No, I'm sorry, honey. Do you have $5? I do have $5. But I have to go to the gas station to get a card. And I'm like, oh, well, I guess you'll have to wait till tomorrow, sweetheart, to get that done because there's no way I'm putting my credit card back in that device. So I don't know how Venmos and PayPals and all of that work. I think with any of those, depending upon the maturity level of your child, and I just avoid those. I mean, even with my son, I had gotten him a savings account and it was his money and I linked it to a debit card, which was for just him. And I talked to the bank until I was blue in the face about, you're not going to let him charge more than he has money for, right? Oh, no, Ms. Reed, we're not going to charge. No, we can't do that. He won't charge anything. Well, once again, next thing I know, he's got overdraft charges on his bank account because, yes, they can control it if you're in the grocery store and you try to swipe your card and there's no money, it will decline it. But through PlayStation, it didn't decline it. So every time he spent $1.99 on something, it charged him $35 for a overdraft fee. And 10 or 12 $1.99s and 10 or 12 $35, he ended up having $400 or $500 in overdraft fees. And because I set up the account, I had to pay for those overdraft charges. So once again, I was able to get some of them removed, but the bank was like, no, sorry. You got to pay, $200 or whatever. So I would just be super cautious around any of that. I would make them get prepaid cards or whatever it is for that device. If it's what are the ones now? Nintendo. I think you can buy Nintendo cards. You can buy PlayStation cards at their checkout at Walmart.
Yeah, and I'm just going to say also, always check your statements. I wasn't realizing my son very quickly. I guess at one time I might have given him a charge to go in and get something. I was in the car and he evidently took a picture of the charge card, set up his own Apple Pay account, and it's a million different, he set up his own Venmo account on my card. And then, a lot of times you'll pay your bill and you're like, oh, it's a little high this month, but I didn't really look at it as closely as I could. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute, I don't go to Starbucks. I'm like, oh, someone's been going to Starbucks. And we were able to trace it down to an Apple Pay account that he set up with my card on his phone. And again, one of the reasons why you want to look at their phones and look at what's going on, because you might be surprised that all those wonderful apps on their phone, you're paying for them with a card you didn't even know they had access to.
So have we been helpful or have we scared you more. 'Cause we're trying to be super helpful and just share with you some of the experiences that we've had as parents.
Well, maybe, end it on a positive. If everybody would go around, or if you don't feel comfortable, you don't have to, but maybe share a success story with social media, something that you've done that you realize, wow, this really made a difference in our family. I'll start. I think I mentioned it before, but one of the most helpful apps that I had put on the kids' phones, and again, I had to be really tough in following through, because you're absolutely right. The kids take it off, they shut it off, but I put a tracking device that lets me know where they are. And like I said, my daughter's away from college. I could tell if she went to hockey practice or not. I can tell, if she went to class, and I could see when she's driving, how fast she's driving. And I can call her up and say, I saw that you were going 85 miles an hour. There's no need to go 85 miles an hour, because I don't know any speed limit that's 85 miles an hour. But it just gave me a little peace of mind for my child that was not around. And with my child that is around, that shuts it off, he knows that when he does shut it off, so does his allowance get shut off. Sometimes we may not be able to control the actual device, because, that's a little bit more challenging, but I can control his allowance that I hand him. And that was the consequence. And our kids, at the end of the day, a lot of them are very money driven, and that kind of hit him where he started to keep the app on more than shut it off. So I find that putting an app that allowed me to keep track of where my kids were gave me peace of mind, and also was very, very helpful. Anybody have an app or something that they feel has really helped their family and that they want to share with the group?
I don't have an app, but I do want to just shine a little bit of light on relationships with our children in regards to phones, especially the kids that, have come from places we don't know that end up in our family. When they come to our families, their connectivity and their friendships are sort of their life. That's their way of having control at that level. And we in our minds already have this belief that, well, those are fake friends, those are scary friends, those are, we start to get fearful, and therefore we get hovering, and we also try to use our own control. So I say all of this because when I was telling you about the boy who went and got, a phone from school to kind of hoodwink me, he's now 18 years old. He's in another foster home, but he has come back to me and he's apologized for lying to me and, making things hard for us. And so I think the bottom line is to realize relationships throughout this, and teaching them and explaining to them that, yeah, you can say that you're afraid, because there are people out there that we don't know, and they appear online to be your best friend, and it could be very dangerous. So, the apps are good, but also the face-to-face that you have with these kids in your home is teaching them, that plant a seed that, they have to be savvy to stranger danger in a different way.
Definitely. Thank you, Kitty. All right, we're almost out of time. We've got about 4 minutes left. If you guys have not put your name in the chat for attendance, if you could please do that, and your email address if you'd like access to the resources page from the presentation. If anybody has any questions or any type of follow-up that they'd like, I'll put my email address in the chat, and you guys can reach out to me for any other additional information that you may need. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you. And please check out the resources when you get the packet, because a lot of the resources of those organizations will give you a lot of what we just talked about, examples of what a contract looks like, examples of how to talk to your kids about their media. There's a lot of events, webinars, and advice on all of those organizations by a lot of really important people that want to see social media be used for good.
We have one more question. What is the lookup site? I think it is
I think-
lookup.live, right?
Yes, and it's
Look up.
it's a 501c3. It's just a really great resource.
Well, thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you for giving us some of your time this evening.